Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
When the Underground Railroad led slaves from south to north, it was with the philosophy, theology, and aid of the Society of Friends. Most of us know them as the Quakers. They are peacemongers and active participants in our community. Hello, I'm Valerie Bridgman Davis, co-pastor of Bernard Full Community Church, and your host for today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Today, we will meet the religious expression known as Friends, learn more about this tradition and its participation in the heritage of this community and the country at large. Welcome with me our guests, Sue Jeffries, a nurse here in the city, Megan Green, a statistician, and Byron Sanford, a housing developer. Welcome to you all. I'm glad you're here with us today, and I guess we'll start on the end, Byron. Tell us how you came to know the Quakers, how long you've been a Quaker, and where you came from before you were there.
Okay, I was raised a Methodist, and after Francie and I married, we shopped around and tried out different religions, and none of them really fit, and she went to her sister's wedding, which was a Quaker ceremony, and came back very excited about it and started attending the small Friends meeting in El Paso, which was about 8 families. And after about a year of that, I became interested and found that it really fit me better when I attended the first yearly meeting at Ghost Ranch of Intermountain Yearly Meeting in New Mexico. And then we moved to Austin in '77, and that's when I joined the local Friends meeting.
All right. And you, Megan?
I was born a Quaker. My parents were Quaker. I grew up in a Quaker community, and I went to a Quaker high school, so I consider myself a Quaker. I've been a Quaker all my life.
Where was that?
I went to Sandy Spring Friends School, which is outside of D.C., between Baltimore and D.C.
And where did you grow up?
In Baltimore.
In Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And Sue?
Well, I first started attending Quaker meeting in '67. I was brought up a Baptist and baptized with full immersion as a teenager. What started us to go was we had a party one evening, and it just came up, and somebody mentioned that a mutual friend of ours was a Quaker, and we decided we would go to meeting that very next day, and everybody in the group ended up attending for several weeks and months, and we just kept attending, and we became members about 2 years later.
So was this the whole youth group from the church when?
No.
Okay, I guess not.
No, it was a group of about 6 of us that was original size.
Correct. Well, let's talk about what a Quaker is. We tried to define this earlier. I think I introduced it as part of the Christian tradition. Somebody want to talk about where it even got started in England? I don't know who's going to do that. Sue.
Well, I'm not sure when it started, but the man who started it was George Fox, and he felt that there was something of God in everybody, and that he felt that the traditional religions got away from what was the real heart of Christianity. And he went around with his Bible, and he went to various churches, and which he called steeple houses, and he interrupted services, and that's, of course, we don't do that now, but that's how he started.
He was a contemporary of John Wesley, I think. Someone was saying earlier, which would have been the 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s. Okay. And it was first called the
Society of Friends.
The name is the Religious Society of Friends. And it's shortened to Society of Friends, and then the nickname is better known as Quakers.
Which comes from?
Well, George Fox would not take his cap off in front of the king, and he said that every man and woman was equal, that there were no there was no one person or any bunch of people over all the others, and he would not quake in the presence of a king, but only in the presence of God. And so that's where the nickname came.
So they've
Quakers.
been Quakers ever since, which is the term, of course, I think most people associate for
It's a common-
themselves. All right. Well, now, I think, Megan, you grew up, you said Quaker, and you went to Quaker school. Can you talk about that for our...
Well, the Quakers have a strong background in education. They feel that it's very important. There are a lot of Quaker colleges and Quaker high schools around this country and around the world, I guess.
What would be a college that people would know?
Earlham College is Quaker.
Swarthmore.
Swarthmore is, yeah.
Swarthmore.
And
Bryn-
Haverford was
Bryn Mawr
founded by
and
Quaker.
Haverford.
Yeah.
Ivy League. Okay.
Main line.
Main line, all right. Well,
East
talk
Coast.
about, earlier we were talking about there being 3 major strands of the Quaker tradition. Someone talk about that for us.
Okay, there's 3 areas. Quakers, like a lot of sects, have broken themselves into pieces and try to pull themselves back. And the 3 major areas of Quakers today are the unprogrammed friends, such as ourselves, which do not have a minister and meet in silent worship. That was the more traditional basis of Quaker fellowship. From that, there sprang 2 other groups, what's now clustered under the Friends United Meeting, which is more traditional in your understanding of religious ceremony with a minister and all with hymn books, and still with silence used throughout the service. And then there's the Evangelical Friends International, which is more oriented toward the West Coast, and they have a minister, and they're very traditional and very, the term is Christocentric, very tied toward traditional Christian beliefs and less tolerant of those who don't follow that philosophy.
Talk about the unprogrammed friends, which you all are a part of. I think someone said there are 60 to 80 people who meet here in Austin. You meet, where do you meet?
3014 Washington Square, which is north of the university, about 2 blocks off of Guadalupe.
And talk about what a typical unprogrammed friends meeting is. You laughed, there's no such thing.
Well, the Quakers tend to be not traditional in a number of areas, but what you find with an unprogrammed meeting, people enter the meeting house, and as Sue mentioned earlier, we not use the term church or steeple, or steeple house. They enter the meeting quietly, find their seat, sit down in silence. And as the room fills, other people do the same thing and basically assume a contemplative or meditative stance. Sometimes you can go through an entire meeting for worship without anyone doing any vocal ministry. Often there is vocal ministry. Usually it sets in after about the first 15 minutes at our meeting, because we usually have the children sit in with us during the first 15 minutes of meeting, and children, even Quaker children, can be noisy. So after the children leave, then often you'll find people moved by something that happened to them during the week, something they've read, and they feel, or are supposed to feel, an overwhelming urge to share this ministry with others. And so they'll rise, speak, and then sit down. Part of the tradition is that people don't respond directly to what was spoken. Now what was spoken might lead that next person into a line of thought, and they'll respond later, but there's not any of this. One person speaks, another person rebuts. It's considered to be a speaking from the heart, and as another reason where they say that they quake. They're quaking with the power of the Lord to speak, and so they stand and speak. You don't see that a whole lot, but you do see people stand and speak.
Part of the underlying idea is that any of us can speak, God can speak through any of us, that we each have a bit of God in us or the inner light, and that any of us can give a message. That's why without the minister or any single body that speaks the Lord for us, we each speak individually.
Did you want to add anything to that, Sam?
They've already added it.
Okay. And we talked also about Bible reading, whether or not there is scripture in the, again, in the traditional sense, Christian sense of that word.
No. We, some people may stand up and read something from the scripture, but it is not planned by anybody to do that. It just happens.
The Quakers tend to steer away from formalities like having a program or having scriptures planned or singing or what other traditions that are built in. I think getting away from the formality is where we get closer to the truth or to the Spirit.
Now, sometimes someone is led to sing, and sometimes other people in the meeting are led to join in, but again, that's not planned either. We have no hymnals that we use during the meeting for worship. It would have to be from by heart. You know, you'd have to know it, know the words.
So there are no printed words to any songs introduced to the Friends meeting.
No, that's
Not
accurate.
during meeting for worship. We have hymnals at the meeting house, but we do that separate from meeting from worship, and that's meant as recreation.
So you may have a hymn sing like other
Yeah.
people, but it's purely recreational in its sense. What about giving? Receiving of monies?
We depend on the goodness of everybody's heart and realization that God's work and takes money, and the support of the meeting takes money, and people just write their checks and give them to the treasurer. There is no collection plate passed around. Sometimes there's a little basket there that people put money in, but nothing's ever mentioned about it during meeting for worship.
Did you want to add something? You looked like you were about to say something more about that. Megan, can you talk about what it's like to grow up Quaker? I don't know that
I
that's
think
a fair
this-
question.
The sense of community that I felt growing up as a Quaker was important to me. To have not just friends and family, but to have a loving community to grow up in. Other than that, it's hard to compare for me because I grew up as a Quaker, so it's hard to know what it's like to not be a Quaker.
Did you ever find yourself being shunned or not in relationship with other people because you were different than?
I didn't sense that much. I went to a Quaker school, so there were a lot of other. Surrounded by-
Were there children there who were not Quakers?
Yeah. Their Quakers are pretty open to other faiths as well, and it was, I would say, 50% of the students were Quaker, something in there.
Byron, can you talk about how this is very different for you, or if it's very different for you than being Methodist, which is what you came?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that appealed to me about the Quakers is the lack of dogma, the lack of tradition, the lack of having someone preach at you. What you find, probably one reason you find a high level of Quaker activism, is that the responsibility of the meeting, of its spiritual life and of its economic life, and all of it relies upon each individual member. And each member, when they become a member of the meeting, feel that responsibility. So if the worship service is going to work, each person has to be making a part of it. Another nice thing is that since there's not a dogma, you might have in a given room people ranging from essentially born-again Christians to agnostics, and there's no one sitting there judging who's more right as a Quaker than the other person. So there's a broader range of religious beliefs and more acceptance. So if you're not fitting the diagram that's laid out in Sunday school of how you're supposed to believe, you can still feel an integral and shared part of the meeting. And since there's not someone up there paid to preach at you, you're not having your values set against one individual. And I found that I disagreed with our ministers. I know you've probably disagreed with yours. And sometimes you wonder if you're out of sync. With Quakers, you know most of the members of the meeting, and if they stand, maybe you know where they're coming from.
And what about for you, Sue? You came up in a Baptist background.
Well, what really drew me to the Quakers was that they were so active in the community. The very first meeting I went to, there was an announcement about what activity that they were doing in the community. And it's been such a long time, I don't remember what it was. And almost immediately, I was on a committee or two. They seemed to be really active, which was so much different from what my experience was. I mean, growing up, we went to church on Sunday and we came home. And that was pretty much it. And what really attracts me also about the Friends is the same thing that attracts Byron, the minimal amount of dogma. I found that in my own background church that I couldn't believe some of those things. They weren't real to me. But believing that there is something of God in every person, I believe that.
Okay. Talk about the activism of the Quakers. We talked, I think, about there not being any like mandate coming down, you will be involved in this or you won't, but there is a lot of activism in the community among people who are also Quakers.
Well, first of all, traditionally Quakers are nonviolent, and that they are conscientious objectors to war. It's not 100%, but that's what the tradition is. We have several national Quaker organizations, not necessarily run by all Quakers, but do work that we believe in. The Friends, help me on this.
FCNL, the
Yeah,
lobbyists.
Friends Committee on National Legislation, and the
American Friends Service Committee.
that's the one I was trying to think of, and that particular group works on trying to better things for other people in the world, and they do not believe in throwing money at a situation. They do not get into a project unless they have people who are committed to that project and who will actually go down and work with people.
You want to add to that, Megan?
And it's also not geared towards converting people in ministry. It's not for that purpose also.
We have an AFSC office here in Austin.
Say what AFSC
American
is
Friends
again.
Service Committee. And their focus has been on the plight of the citizens of Central America, working closely with trying to come up with a realistic program for El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala. And so there's been a lot of activity on that, and they're based here in Austin, this one part of American Friends Service Committee, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. But it's, again, part of the Quaker faith through action. And that's where a lot of Friends, people come into the Society of Friends, is this yearning to do something. You see waves of Friends, World War II and Korean War and Vietnam War, and we had a blip on the Persian War. People feeling that something is amiss, and maybe these folks have something that they can offer. The interesting thing on the Quaker outreach is that people have recognized Quakers and know there's a lot of Quakers, but worldwide there's less Quakers in the world than there are Catholics in El Paso. There's about 300,000 Quakers in the whole world.
So there really isn't an emphasis on converting people, but obviously people do convert. And there is no process to that. What happens when someone decides to be a Quaker?
Well, you have attended a meeting for some time. People have gotten to know you because you're part of the community, and you have worked with people. You've been on committees. Then you write a letter to the meeting, and you request membership, and a committee, a clearness committee is appointed, and that committee probably consists of about 3 or 4 people who will come and meet with you and talk to you about how your belief in Quakerism, and how you fit in with the meeting, and how you view God and war and other things. And then they make a recommendation that you be admitted to the meeting. And this process is informative for you because it makes you think about why you want to become a member of the meeting. It's just not like saying, well, I want to become a member of the meeting, and boom, you're a member. You have to prove to yourself, really, that you are ready to become a member.
Well, we talked earlier about the one thing about being a Quaker is that you believe there's God, some of God in every person. Is there anything else that if I were going before committee, clearness committee, they would expect me to respond to? Megan or Byron, either one of you?
Well, that's real integral in how you look at it. You know, it goes to the fact that Quakers believe there's that of God in Saddam Hussein and George Bush and
Adolf Hitler.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to the peace testimony, and it leads to the feeling of seeking that from other people. But like we said, there's no part of the peace testimony is as much as anything. If we have a dogma, that's it. But the rest of it is just a sense and of this person's spiritual journey.
Have either of you ever sat on a clearance committee?
I have, but it's been so long.
I've had numerous clearness committees for clearness through different passages in life. It's something you can have ask for a clearness committee to help you through with any decision.
Can you talk about what that is? I'm not
You have a
clear.
committee which just helps you to come to a decision on whether you want to get married under the care of the meeting, or whether you want to become a member of the meeting, or other difficult decisions in life. If you have a death in the family, you can have a clearness committee to help you work through that.
And that committee is pulled together by the person asking for it?
You can request certain people, or the meeting comes to decisions on who should be on your committee.
Usually by volunteers in our meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's try again about I'm trying to figure out still about how just the day-to-day running of the meeting goes. I know you said something about a treasurer. Are there other
Well, I think
officers or?
there are, but I think the most important thing is that how we make decisions.
Yes, please talk about that.
The meeting for business is in some ways a continuation of the meeting for worship, not that they necessarily lead from one to the other. But that when you speak about an issue, that you view it in the same way as if you were speaking during meeting for worship, that you speak from an inner light. No decision is made until the meeting comes to consensus. One person who feels that something isn't right about a particular issue can stop progress on that, and the decision is laid down to come up some other time. But it's not. It sounds almost like minority rule, but minority rule only when things are going to change.
And it's not really stopping progress. It's stopping
that's-
action on the item at that point. The Quaker belief is that from the light, a solution will come. It might be something different from where they're going. And so the person who has a strong feeling against it can say, I'm not ready for us to make a decision at this time. So the clerk will say, we'll revisit that. And if they do, it might come back. Sometimes it's like with slavery. It took Quakers 100 years to come to grips to that. Sometimes we move a little faster.
Sometimes you move a little faster. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, sometimes people will have a disagreement, but Quakers are very introspective. They're very thoughtful about the process. And when there is a disagreement, one person may be willing to step aside with their, not feeling comfortable with the decision. They may be willing to step aside in light of seeing the unity in everyone else's decisions.
So unity is at issue for the Quaker meeting, for the meeting. All right, we are almost out of time. I'm sorry to say. I want to know if there's any one thing you would want people to know about Quakers before we go.
I feel like I've hit everything.
That's great. That's really good if you feel like you hit everything. Byron or Megan?
I think the peace testimony is certainly very important, and we've touched on that.
And the spiritual aspect of the meeting. It can be a very spiritual experience, sometimes more so than others, but there's a sense of community there that even when you walk in, you sense.
Great. As we come to the close of today's discussion, I really want to thank Sue Jeffries, Megan Green, and Byron Sanford for their sharing of their faith in their own expression of the Christian faith. On behalf of Austin Faith Dialogue, I'm Valerie Bridgman Davis, thanking you for watching and inviting you to join us next week at this same time. Peace to you.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.